When I first started out in college with my bachelor's degree, I studied recreation and leisure services, which just means that we studied how people use their time, their free time, right? What do they do when the work is done and they get all this free time? And one of the things that I noticed as we studied people and history and how people use the time that they get that is free in their lives, I started noticing that every civilization's goal at some level is to become prosperous enough to give more free time, right? And so as we have moved forward in history and technology has grown, we've actually been able to do this, right? That the studies show that most middle-class American families have as much wealth and free time as Roman leaders did, right? As rulers and emperors did. That's a pretty cool thing when we think about it, right? That technology, like electricity and the internet, and of course you go farther enough back in the cotton gin, right? All of these things freed up time and gave us more time in our day. How do we use it though? If you're like me and most people, I've recognized lately just how much time I spend on things that really don't add up to much, right? I watch TV shows and movies, I look at social media, I learn trivia, and love to play, those kind of games and word puzzles. But at the end of the day, how did that time really add up for useful things? And if you're like me, the older I get, the faster time goes, right? When we're young, it seems like it goes so slow, but the older I get, the more I blink, and just time has gone by so fast, right? The old saying is that the days are long, but the years are short. And that's so true. So how do we live in a world with all of this temptation and all of these uses for our time, that work is constantly connected to us, and when we finally get some free time, it's all we can do just to rest and start to get back on that hamster wheel of life again, right? And the reality is, man, we make time for the things that are important to us. That's just true. We make time for the things that are important to us, and the way we spend our time shows us what's important to us. If you were to add up, and I were to add up all the hours we spend looking at our smartphones, right? Looking at our computer screens and tablets, looking at our television screens, right? And all of these frivolous things, there's nothing wrong with them until they become a distraction from what God really wants in our lives. And the good news is, in the middle of this struggle, we're not the first to deal with this. The early church struggled with this too. As early Christians, living in the reign of the Roman Empire, we're dealing with this desire to get enough wealth and get enough prosperity to be comfortable, to have this leisure time that most people spent their whole day from sunup to sundown just trying to work and make a living and put a roof over their family's head and put food in their children's bellies. And then they would get a little bit of time in the evening, right? And then they'd rest and get up and do it all over again. Sounds familiar, right? And so Paul, writing to the church community in Ephesus that is struggling with, how do we live the life that God wants us to live? How do we balance the demands of the world with the desire of the kingdom in heaven, right? And in Ephesians chapter 5, Paul writes this: "So be careful how you live. Don't live like fools, but like those who are wise. Make the most of every opportunity in these evil days. Don't act thoughtlessly, but understand what the Lord wants you to do." It sounds like something you'd hear on a Sunday morning from a preacher or a pastor today, right? But how do we live a life that pleases God? How do we do what God wants us to do? Well, he tells us, he says, be careful how you live. Don't live like fools, right? When he says don't act thoughtlessly in verse 17, that word thoughtlessly is the Greek word for foolishness or ignorance. That we're not ignorant. We know what God wants us to do. God wants us to love people and to make disciples. He said, love God, love people, make disciples. That's everything God wants us to do. Very simple, but it's not easy, is it, right? Simple and easy aren't the same thing. So here's what I want you to start thinking about as you start your week and maybe a new season in your life, is that we make time for the things that are important to us, right? That sure, our job should be important to us because that's how we provide for our families. And sure, we should make time, to rest so we can have a life that's productive, so that we can have restoration and renewal in our lives. But we also make time for our marriages, for our children, right? For our families, because we make time for the things that are important to us. We make time for our health. We also make time, hopefully, for our relationship with God. And of course, hopefully we're making time to make disciples, to spread the gospel, to develop communities that reach the world, right? Jesus said, you're the salt of the earth, you're earth preservers, right? You're light in the darkness. And I think that's what Paul is getting at, where he says, make the most of every opportunity in these evil days. Make the most of every opportunity, that every day is an opportunity everywhere we go. When you go to work, right? At the community, get-togethers, at the conference rooms, at the meetings, and your families sitting around the dinner table, everywhere you go is an opportunity to bring the kingdom. So make the most of every opportunity and recognize that, yes, we make time for the things that are important to us, but we also, don't get distracted and let that time slip through your fingers. Because before you know it, we're just a blip on the radar of eternity. And we've only got so many days, right? What's the other passage, right, from Psalms, where teach me to number my days? Don't live thoughtlessly, right? Make the most of every opportunity, because we make time for the things that are important to us. And if making disciples and bringing the kingdom is important, we'll make time for that too. So that's my encouragement, my motivation for you and me today. Make the most of every opportunity, because we make time for the things that are important to us. And we want to make sure the kingdom is important in our lives as well. So be blessed this week.